Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, October 28th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Matt Stoller, fellow at the Open Market Institute, author of Goliath, the 100-year war between monopoly power and democracy. Also on the program today, despite Donald Trump, military kills the ISIS leader al-Baghdadi. Meanwhile, a Bolton deputy slated to testify today instead seeks a court ruling, which is either a slow walk tactic or it could be big problems for other members of the Trump administration. Meanwhile, the EU agrees to another Brexit extension, a new English election in the offing, just a rolling cluster of stuff. 200,000 people evacuate in California, fleeing wildfires. As people debate what to do with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Energy Company. Those Black Jewel coal miners in Kentucky, they have won their fight for back pay after almost 2 months of literally putting their bodies in front of trains with coals. Speaking of which, massive protests in Chile forced the president to replace his entire cabinet. Unlikely to be enough. 1 million of the 18 million Chileans hit the streets, I think, this weekend. 7-8% of the entire country. The equivalent of that would be 25 million people in one place in this country. Meanwhile, California Congresswoman Katie Hill to resign in the wake of a revenge porn play by ex-husband. Shia Tlaib endorses Bernie Sanders. Exxon sued by the Massachusetts AG for hiding knowledge of climate change from consumers and investors. And rest in peace, John Conyers, former congressman, ousted because of sexual harassment claims, dead at age 90. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am back from Las Vegas. My voice is almost recovered. I tend to indulge a little bit too much while I'm there, and so that impacts my ability to speak.
Let's meet up with the guys from the other toilet table and go tear it up.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
The guys with the asbestos case have the hookup. Let's go.
It honestly is like... It is sort of like crazy, the conversations I'll have at like 1 a.m. about going after this hotel chain regarding trafficking, or, you know, sort of like the horrible stuff that this attorney found in discovery about, X, Y, or Z drug, it is pretty stunning. You just drink copious amounts of alcohol and then talk about the worst human beings in the world. But it's fun to do a couple of times a year for me. I hope you enjoyed those interviews that we had this go round. Sometimes you just don't know what you're going to get down there, but I thought those interviews were quite interesting. Some house cleaning. We are several hundred people away from 10,000 followers on Instagram. If you have an Instagram account, by all means, you should be following us and spreading it around to your friends, because the stuff that our artificial intelligence bot is posting up there is fantastic. So check it out. I think the latest thing is a Andrew Yang karaoke that you really need to see to believe. Also, our apps are up. We're going to be shooting a video in the next couple of days on how to use it, but it's quite simple. Both iOS and Android. You can get it at majorityapp.com or just get it on wherever you get your apps. Not only can you log in as a member, not only can you search the archives, not only do you get links for stuff and listen live or watch the YouTube or IM the show or call the show, all within the app. You also get the AM Quickie. And if you have not signed up for the AM Quickie, we need your help. Go do it. Try it out. People seem to love the show. It has actually 94 reviews on iTunes at this point, and all the reviews help because now iTunes is back up. And so, getting reviews for it is really going to make a big difference. Has 94 reviews on iTunes. 3 of them are 4-star. And 91 are 5-star. So head over there and review the AM Quickie and check it out. It just gives you the headlines you need every morning, less than 5 minutes, and gives you a slight preview of what we're going to be talking about on the show. So check that out. And lastly, I just want to say thank you to Ronald Reagan, who sent me a Thanos collector's item action figure. I don't know if it's a collection item, but he just wrote, "Wow, Sam, this is basically you. Makes you effing think." And there it is, Thanos. Yep. All right, let's get into this. We're going to be starting off today's program with something that is probably largely irrelevant in the great scheme of things, although it does give you a certain amount of hope. Later in the fun half, we will discuss how some people are reacting to it and why it's ridiculous, their reaction. But as you know, or may not know, the World Series is now, we're on game 6 now, right? And Houston Astros and Washington Nationals. Astros are up now 4-2. And because the game was played in Washington, D.C., and my understanding is that the owners of the Nationals were sort of hoping that the president wouldn't ask to sit with them, which I can understand. And as is customary, the presence of the president of the United States is announced to everyone in the ball field. And, people weren't so psyched to see him. Here it is. And they have a picture of some Marines on the big Jumbotron. Everybody's cheering their Marines, of course. Military. That's what sporting events are all about. And there's the President of the United States. Ooh. And then they cut back to the Marines. Just for the juxtaposition. Here's Donald Trump's perspective on it. As he's getting booed, it's a little hurtful to him. So if you have problems seeing someone's feelings get hurt, you might want to look away from Donald Trump's expression.
It's the World Series. The President and First Lady of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and Melania Trump.
Clapping. There's booing, and then he just waves quickly, and then, they're booing at me. They're booing at me. They're booing at me. They're booing at me. He's so mad. And I gotta say, it's like one of those things that's like where like he looks like a freshman in high school who's walking down the hallway and he sees somebody wave and you're like, hey, and you realize they're not waving at you and you just sort of like take your hand and just go, you know, like that.
Oh, hey, that's AJ. He's really cool. Hey, what's up? Oh. I wasn't waving.
Oh my God, I can't believe the seniors are waving.
I don't even know them anyways. They're stupid.
I hate all of those people.
I hate Washington, D.C. I hate everybody.
And then, sadly, and we will talk about this more in our analysis later in the program of just what has happened to this country. But the audience at the Washington Nationals World Series game came up with a plan in which to salute their president. And here is what they came up with. Yeah,
Lock him up. Lock him up.
There
Finally.
Yep.
I wonder if
Christ. Notice like Democrats follow the lead of your people. It starts on the streets. Don't be like, yeah, don't do that.
I wonder if the higher up you are in the stadium, the more likely you are to chant "lock him up," because that's the upper deck right there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting theory. But we will get to more of the reaction to that, which is actually almost as ridiculous as just. I mean, it's as ridiculous as anything I've seen. But we will check that out later. Hey, folks, Babbel will get you speaking a new language quickly and with confidence. You can choose from 14 different languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Russian. There was a whole mess of them. Speak your new language within weeks. Babbel's teaching method and speech recognition technology has been proven effective across multiple studies. Babbel's lessons, they're not created by algorithms. They're not created by artificial intelligence. They're created by 100 language experts. Those are real human beings, people. And they are convenient. They're engaging. They last 10 to 15 minutes, so you don't get overwhelmed. You learn through interactive dialogues, so you can perfect the way that your accent and your pronunciation. It's available as an app on your phone, your iPad, your tablet. I don't know, maybe your watch probably, or online. Progress syncs across all the devices. We are super psyched to get the Majority Report Babbel Challenge going. I wonder if we should actually talk to them about that. I don't know if they know that we're doing that. But Jamie's sick today, so we couldn't get it. We couldn't launch it. We got to launch it in the next couple of days. We're all going to get babbled, as it were, and speak Spanish. I'll take my kids on a trip. We'll take them down to Mexico or something and actually show them. My daughter's doing quite well in Italian. I'm going to get her maybe on this and see if that helps her. Because you listen to this show, Babbel has a very special offer for you. Go to Babbel.com, select the language of your choice. Once you try it for free and you're ready to sign up, select the 3-month option, and Babbel will give you an additional 3 months for free with the promo code MAJORITY. That's 6 months for the cost of 3 with promo code MAJORITY. Go to Babbel, Babbel.com, enter promo code MAJORITY. You get that extra 3 months. Babbel, speak a new language with confidence. As you know, I am constantly seeking a way of both having convenience and to stay fit. I think I've been doing a fairly decent job. I have been trying...
In a certain sense.
Kettlebell.
Kettlebell.
Yeah, are you aware of this?
I'm aware this is the easiest way to eat healthy imaginable.
Exactly. They deliver it right to your door. I can't even mention this without thinking about that shepherd's pie with sweet potato mash or whatever they call that. It's delicious. But that's the hardest part for me anyways, is how to eat healthily how much to eat. I have no portion control. I have no idea, honestly.
They got you hooked up on that.
Well, the thing is, exactly. And I'm finding not only do I love the food, but I'm learning how to proportion, like how much I should be eating. I just don't have like I can go all day without eating, and then I can eat everything in sight. That's not a great way to eat, but Kettlebell offers the nutrition you need without any of the hassle. Their goal is to help you achieve yours. They got meal plans that are tailored to your needs. You can sign up for a plan or order a la carte. There's no long-term contracts required. Meals get delivered to your door twice a week. Optimal freshness. You don't need to worry about sourcing ingredients or fretting over the macros. You just heat, serve, and get the food you need for real sustainable change. They have like multiple different programs. You can get vegetarian. You can go keto, which has like low carb or at least low like starchy carb. Whole 30 and paleo options available. I may try out the paleo.
Check it out.
They got stuff like they had the wild salmon cakes, which are fantastic. I had pulled pork with roasted carrots over rice. I tried like one from the keto, one from the regular. I can't remember where the wild salmon cakes were from, but it was all delicious. And the portion size is super helpful because it gives me a sense of like, this is how much a normal human being eats. I do have some type of brain problem. Feed the champion in you with Kettlebell Kitchen. Go to kettlebellkitchen.com. Kettlebellkitchen.com. Enter the code MAJORITY for $25 off your first two orders. That's if you're a new customer. That's $25 off of each of your first two orders at kettlebellkitchen.com. Code is MAJORITY. And we got a couple more here. Folks, I'm on the road. It used to be when I went on the road, my dental hygiene would go out the window because I had to bring my my non-electric toothbrush because I'm not going to take one of those huge bulky things with a charger and that. It's just not going to happen. And if you get the old-timey portable ones, those things like the size of a small chainsaw. What is it that makes a better toothbrush? If you ask your dentist, they will tell you, because I have. It's less about the brush. It's more about how you use it. Building a habit. And that is what Quip is. That's what I love the most about Quip. It has like the sensitive vibrations, has a built-in timer. The timer tells you got to do it for 2 minutes. Sometimes I'll go 4. But the point is that it and then it gives you like a pulse every 30 seconds to tell you when to switch. They send you a new brush head every 3 months, has clean new bristles, right on schedule. The beauty for me is the design of the brush. It is basically the size of a regular toothbrush. It's beautiful looking and stylish, but it's super convenient. And the bottom line is, it doesn't matter what brush you have. If you do not use it and use it properly, it's useless. Quip makes brushing something you want to do twice a day, at least. And the bottom line is, Quip is how you maintain and develop, or I should say develop and maintain a good brushing habit. Quip starts at just $25, and you'll get your first refill free at getquip.com/majority. There's a simple way to get to support the show and start brushing better. Be like my sister. Get the Quip as a gift. Well, I guess I got her for a gift. Have your dentist compliment you. It's pretty crazy. Getquip.com/majority for your first refill free. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Matt Stoller about his new book, Goliath, the 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program fellow at the Open Markets Institute and author of Goliath, the 100-year war between monopoly power and democracy. Matt Stoller, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, all right, let's start. And basically, the overview of this is the sort of, I guess, the sad tale of how the Democratic Party in particular, I mean, more broadly, our society, lost sight of some very important principles that made our system work. Let's start just with the general problem that we're facing now, and then I want to go back and follow Wright Patman, who is essentially the I guess the protagonist of your story, who's basically almost in some ways acts as like a narrator, and maybe that's just a guide, if you will, through that history. But just let's start with just sort of the problem as you see it.
Yeah, like spirit animal, maybe not. I think might be a good for Patman. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. I think, I started writing this book because I was a staffer during the financial crisis, and I'm a Democrat. And I was like, why did we screw everything up so badly, right? Why did we allow a foreclosure crisis? Why did we bail out the banks and enable Wall Street executives to get bonuses instead of jail time? What did we do wrong? And because I saw what the Obama administration did. I saw what people in Congress did, and it was not corrupt. It was not like they were getting bribed for what they were doing. And I was like, what happened? Why did we just systematically promote injustice? And so I looked back over the last century. This kind of led me on a long research project, which ended up in this book. And what I figured out is that there used to be this whole tradition of attacking and fighting concentrated power. And that's a tradition that has largely been hidden, was at least hidden from me, but it was embedded in these kind of rural populist politicians, and Wright Patman is one of them from Texarkana, who opposed big banks, they opposed monopolies, and they opposed them for political reasons. They thought that they were autocrats, that they were sort of kind of the analogs to fascists in Europe, and they won in the first half of the century. And then in the second half of the century, although really kind of starting more in the 1970s, we allowed our robber barons to return. And you spin that forward 40 years, and today you have, not just the financial crisis caused by too big to fail banks, but also monopolies in every sector of our economy, everything from search and social, which are big markets in cable and airlines, to things like peanut butter or bank management software or syringes, munitions and missiles, just kind of everywhere. Monopolization is a systemic feature of the American economy. And monopolies, what they do, this is the physical manifestation of inequality, right? They increase wage inequality, wealth inequality, regional inequality. They reduce business innovation. They reduce productivity. They're bad for workers. They corrupt our society and our politics, so you can't deal with problems like climate change. And it was a philosophical change in the 1970s that led us to transform ourselves from citizens to consumers, and led us to think, oh, well, if we just allow the concentration of capital, that will be more efficient. And that was the philosophy in 2008 that Obama and company and the Democrats in general kind of took with them in trying to address a political crisis. They just thought, well, we learned to concentrate power and wealth in the hands of economists and technocratic experts to fix problems. So, wow, we have a really big problem now, this huge crisis. So what we really need to do is concentrate wealth and power further to fix that problem. And I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but that was the philosophy. Those were the lessons that people learned in the 1970s. And to really understand that, you have to get back to the fights over the New Deal, fights over corporate power, and then how those fights manifested in the 1970s and 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
All right. Well, let's do that. And it goes back. Well, I mean, it goes back 100 years or so. So just, I mean, let's take us from the sort of the nascent era of anti-monopolism, and where did that sentiment? I mean, to a certain extent, that sentiment was at the founding of the country. No, I mean, on some level, or was it really? Was that not the case?
No, it was. You know, the Boston Tea Party was not just a revolt against taxes. It was, in fact, a revolt because what the East India Company was trying to do is they were trying to ship in cheap tea with tax concessions. So, in fact, the Boston Tea Party was a rebellion against lower taxes, because those lower taxes were enabling the East India Company to monopolize the tea trade, essentially to drive out of business all of the middlemen, merchants in the colonies, people like John Hancock. It was like a colonial Walmart. That's what the East India Company was. And the Boston Tea Party and then the tea boycotts were opposition to monopolization. They weren't really opposition to the levying of taxes. They were opposition to the use of the tax system to structure markets in a way that would take power from the colonists and move that power to a monopoly corporation headquartered far away in England.
On some level, the analog, the modern day analog, would have been Amazon not having to pay sales tax for years.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you know what you see is there were a lot of fears at the time in the 1770s. You know, the East India Company had just they were allowed to occupy territory, so they had just induced a famine in the Bengal province in India. About 1 million people died. And in the kind of North American colonies of the British Empire, and Bengal was part of the British Empire, they were worried that, you know, the East India Company could do the same thing here if they were able to monopolize the necessities of life. So there was a national security element to it. But it's always about political power. And today you see the same fight with Amazon, Facebook, and Google, who are governing. They are private governments. That is what a monopoly is. They are governing our information in our society, and in many ways they are governing our politics. And we have not seen anything like them maybe ever, but maybe since the East India Company, maybe since the robber barons in the late 19th century. It's always hard to draw specific analogies, but this is a political problem. And my book doesn't start with the East India Company. I thought about starting it there, but you know, you kind of, it's always hard to figure out where to start a history book. But you know, I started in 1910 with Teddy Roosevelt giving a speech at Osawatomie, Kansas. It was 100 years later, Obama actually gave a speech at Osawatomie, Kansas to honor that speech. It was known as the New Nationalism Speech. And it's because the election of 1912 was the election when we determined what corporate America would look like. So corporate America really got its start in rough like 1894-95 when J.P. Morgan engineered a giant merger wave and created companies like General Electric, International Harvester, U.S. Steel. These were giant roll-ups of the technologically advanced organizations of the day. And by 1910, there was sort of this crisis because you had, you know, massive train accidents, you had huge inequality, you had corruption. It was pretty similar to today. And there had been attempts to deal with it. But the election of 1912 was when you saw a real battle over corporate power. And there was Teddy Roosevelt, who's, you know, he's thought of today as a great trustbuster, but in fact, he didn't like the antitrust laws. He was more, he wanted to actually have monopolies running the country. He just wanted the state to run them. It's almost a kind of proto-fascist view, although fascism hadn't been created yet. So, but it was just kind of how do we contain industrial power? His view was, well, I'll run it. I'll run it out of the White House. And then you had William Howard Taft, who basically didn't want to do much about the monopolies. He just kind of wanted to let private masters run things. And Teddy Roosevelt wanted public masters to run things, a.k.a. Teddy Roosevelt. And then you had Eugene Debs, who in many ways agreed with Teddy Roosevelt, although he wanted to nationalize these monopolies. And then you had Woodrow Wilson, who was advised by Louis Brandeis, And he ran on something called the New Freedom, and he ended up winning. And Brandeis's view was we need we don't want public masters or private masters. We want no masters. We want to break up these companies, not so that there are no economies of scale, but break them up so that you have a competitive marketplace and then regulate business practices so that the markets stay open and competitive, and so that competition leads to things that we think are socially beneficial as opposed to, competing based on fraud or harmful activities.
So,
and that was sort of the fight.
Okay.
Right?
So, and we've just sort of laid out the different, I guess, responses that one could have. I mean, for the most part, at least those who want to tackle these monopolies. So, just in terms of Roosevelt and Debs, in terms of their different perspective on this, what was from Debs' perspective, the idea is, right, we're going to democratize the means of production, in that the state is a reflection of all the people, I guess, right?
Debs was a Marxist. Debs wanted to nationalize the means of production, and he also believed, like Roosevelt, that
Matt, where'd you
natural.
Hold on, Matt. What are you walking away from your phone?
No.
Okay, there you go.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So he wanted to. It was Marxist. He wanted to nationalize the means of production. How is that different from what Roosevelt wanted to do? Like, where is the difference there, and what in terms of sort of the philosophical difference?
It wasn't really that different. That's the thing, is that Roosevelt had a kind of, Roosevelt was probably kind of had a power sharing arrangement with the J.P. Morgans of the day, whereas Debs, I suspect, wanted to just displace them entirely. But philosophically, they weren't that different. In fact, Debs kind of accused Teddy Roosevelt of stealing his platform.
Okay, fair enough. So it's a difference, you're saying, in degree as opposed to kind.
Yeah, and Roosevelt was. They were just different. They were different characters, and Roosevelt was much more into warfare, whereas Debs had a kind of international solidarity framework. But in general, the underlying philosophy was basically the same.
Okay, and so those are the ways that one would address this, and Brandeis's version wins out, which is this idea that no one's going to have a concentration of power.
That's right. You're going to have we're going to contain industrial power through in what he called industrial democracy, right? And just to give you a sense for why, I know it seems crazy to say Eugene Debs and Teddy Roosevelt were basically the same, but think about it. This debate continued into the 1920s and 30s. And what you saw in the 1930s was you basically saw New Dealers who were the ideological descendants of Brandeis and Wilson. They looked at Europe and they said, well, fascism in Germany or communism in the Soviet Union, these are both totalitarian systems, right? So they saw them as basically equivalent, one of which was the state taking over the government and the other one was the government taking over the state.
And where would, and maybe we're leaping ahead a little bit, but let's have it in this context, because we could have a similar argument, I guess, or a conversation about in terms of Bernie and Warren on some level, and some people are certainly having that. Where would the idea of worker-owned workers owning the means of production largely? Where would that fit within that, or is that largely just a different way of or is that something that can coexist and really doesn't have any implications necessarily for antitrust?
Well, so Brandeis was a big fan of worker co-ops. It's really it's more about centralization versus decentralization than, the specific ownership models. So Debs wanted federal government to own, most of the means of production. He wasn't totally clear about everything that he wanted, but that was sort of the gist of it. Whereas Brandeis, and I guess later Keynes and New Dealers were interested in workers having ownership. Co-ops were always a big part of that of that framework, credit unions, associations, things that allowed people to, essentially it was a sort of form of producerism. And producerism says that the people that do the work, that produce the goods or services, should be the ones to benefit from that versus the middlemen, whether those are financiers or whether those are kind of corrupt public servants. And so it was really, the real question was, do you want to centralize production, or do you not want to, or do you want to decentralize production? And Debs and Roosevelt believed that, monopolies are natural, that it's just centralization is just the way of the world, very similar to the neoliberal framework. And Brandeis did not think that. Wilson did not think that. And they believed that there was political agency in how we could structure our corporations. They were in favor of co-ops. Taft was not really, I don't think he was a huge fan of co-ops. But the actual ability to own the means of production was not, that was really, the question was really about whether that would be done centrally or whether you would have decentralized kind of agglomerations of capital competing in markets.
Okay, and I think that's just important for people to understand, because it's like a slightly different plane of an argument, right? Where we're looking at just like a slightly different, because, and when we talk about producerism, that takes us up to Patman. But explain how producerism is different in terms of its conceit of a Marxist perspective on what happens with relationship between labor and capital.
Yeah, so producerism, you go back to Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Paine, the yeoman farmer model. Whatever, he who shall not work shall not eat, which you can go back to even earlier. British, the levelers in the 1600s, just this idea that if you are somebody who produces, you're a worker, you're an engineer, you're a businessman, a businesswoman, you should gain the fruits of that labor. And if you are a middleman or financier, then you should not gain the fruits of other people's labor. Right, that's the basic idea, and the vision there is structure markets and structure corporations and structure how human society to enable that, and decentralize ownership of property to enable that. And I think the Marxist perspective, and there are lots of different ways to talk about Marx. So I'm sure there's a bunch of Marxist perspectives which would say, oh, well, we totally agree with that, what I just said about Brandeis. But from my understanding, and sort of from what the Debs and kind of the communist, the pre-Soviet communists thought, is their view was, look, property itself is the problem. Private property itself is the problem. Therefore, what you really should do is just get rid of private property and have everything done communally and collectively through, the centralized state government. And that's just a different vision. I mean, you see that today with sort of some people like Matt Brunig, who believes that. But essentially, that would be everybody owns kind of a share of society, and then you collectively vote over what the kind of large decision maker does in that giant corporation. And that's, I guess, the kind of division versus the other vision, which is actually everybody needs to have a little piece of land instead of everybody working on a collective giant farm.
Okay, so now we get up to the New Deal. Brandeis's vision wins the day to some extent. Obviously, investment in a lot of the New Deal also involved investing in public works, and that how does
right? But that's not a communist framework. I mean, there have been, investment in public works has been something that, that's 500 years old, 1,000 years old. That's not the idea that the government creates roads or that the government creates, infrastructure, that it has collective obligations that's not something that is yes, there's some centralization involved there, but it's, we had the post office in 1792. This is not part of that. That doesn't belong to this, they say, the Marxist tradition.
Right. But yet I mean, theoretically, one could imagine a situation where it's like, we don't want to give the federal government, and I guess maybe there's competition in terms of, municipal governments and state governments all have a different role in terms of dealing with roads, let's say. And maybe there's, I mean, I'm just trying to, the gist of the New Deal was not just a function of antitrust. That was just a big part of how to deal with the problems that had come out of the Depression.
Well, so it's not just antitrust. Antitrust is a specific type of law that's fairly narrow to deal with industrial companies.
Anti-monopolization.
But No. Yes, part of it was anti-monopolization, but the anti-monopoly tradition is much bigger than just antitrust, right? So antitrust goes after specific industrial companies. What happened in the 1920s is you saw this decade of corporatism where people lost faith in democracy. And I go into Andrew Mellon, who's this like fascinating evil character, or he's sort of a villain. He's Secretary of the Treasury, like does all sorts of self-dealing. It's a very corrupt and fascinating decade. The KKK is ascendant. Everybody's demoralized. Who cares about democracy? And then in the 1930s, the people who are essentially governing in that era are large financial holding companies, namely the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Mellons, and the Rockefellers, DuPonts, the Mellons, and J.P. Morgan, the bank, right? Those guys are these are effectively informal financial empires, and they control most of the business and political assets of the United States. Now, the New Deal was about attacking and destroying the power that those four families had over the American political economy, and he did that through the whole set of different policy choices and protests, including fiscal policy, so like breaking the control that the bankers had over the Federal Reserve. Yes, there was antitrust, labor policy, so unionization, social welfare, and then financial policy, but also things like breaking up the electric utilities, which we also did, or breaking up aerospace companies, which we also did, or breaking up banks, which we also did. And then there was a whole bunch of fights over, and this took years. This took, 5 to 10 years. It was like, imagine everything that Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders is proposing, and 75% of that stuff gets done in 5 to 10 years. I mean, that's what the New Deal was actually about. And it was basically the only experiment that showed that democracy could work in the 1930s. Other than that, you had a bunch of weak democracies that were kind of flailing around, and people were very unhappy, France and England. And then you had fascism, which for a lot of people seemed to kind of deliver what the democracies could not. And then you had the Soviet Union, which again, I mean, this was all PR, but at the time people were like, oh, they're actually seem to be delivering, kind of lifting people out of poverty. It's very much the way that people often look at China today. They have something that's kind of working. And so the New Deal was so important because it did show that you could have a government that was governed by its people, that we did not have to knuckle under to these private financial autocrats who were running things. And so, today you see Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's kind of testifying before Congress as a business leader, but really not as a business leader, more as a political leader who's making choices about what we as a society get to see, right? And that's the level of, and now the real debate today is between Elizabeth Warren and Mark Zuckerberg. It's not between any of the candidates. That's the level of political fight that we're dealing with today. And that's the level of political fight that we were dealing with from the 19-teens until the 1930s. It was a fight over who governs, the people through their democratic institutions, or autocrats through financial holding companies and industrial monopolies.
And okay, so let's go into just tell us about Wright Patman, and we will sort of, I guess, work our way through most of the 20th century till we get to the 70s, where this sort of falls apart. But tell us who Wright Patman was.
Yeah, so Wright Patman is this cotton tenant farmer from Texarkana, which is sort of the border of Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. And he gets elected to Congress in 1928, takes office in 29, and he starts attacking Andrew Mellon and supporting, trying to get World War I veterans money that they hadn't been paid during the war. He was like, they should be paid. Basically, their pension should be accelerated. And this is not a big fight until the Depression, when everything kind of collapses. And the veterans themselves start marching to D.C., very much like Occupy Wall Street, and they say, hey, we're poor. We fought for this country. You should, help us. The government should help us. And out of that, Patman ended up filing articles of impeachment against Andrew Mellon, who was blocking the payment to these veterans. And then Herbert Hoover tear gassed them. And that was, and got rid of, pushed them out of D.C. And it was the Army. He ordered the Army to do it. The Army was led by Douglas MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, like sort of later heroes. And that was kind of laid the foundation. This was called the Bonus March. That laid the foundation for the New Deal, because it showed how corrupt and callous the old order was. And then I go into how FDR ended up outmaneuvering the monopolists in the Democratic Party in the 1932 primary, who wanted to run on social issues and not the economy. And then he ended up defeating Hoover and had this kind of gang fight between, he put Mellon on trial for tax fraud. This is the Secretary of the Treasury and the third richest guy in the country, and he goes on trial for tax fraud. He breaks their power kind of systematically. And it's not just FDR, but these Wright Patman is hugely involved in this, fighting against corruption, both in the corporate state, in the banking world, also in the judiciary. There are massive fights within the judiciary. And Patman is also fights against chain stores. So they had their Walmarts in the 1920s and 30s. It was called the A&P, which today we know of as a sort of a harmless store that went bankrupt a couple of years ago. But in the 1920s and 30s, it was the predatory Walmart of its day. And Patman led the fight to impose pricing laws to prevent them from driving their competitors out of business. And so over the course of the the late 1920s, all the way into the 1970s, because Patman lasted, he lived until 1976, and he eventually became the chair of the banking committee in the 60s.
48 years in Congress.
46 years.
46 years.
46 years. And then I think 15 years or 14 years as the head of the banking committee. He fought against concentrations of power. He fought against banking deregulation. And in some cases, he fought against his own party to impose that. And he lost a lot of battles, but he also won a lot of battles. And then in 1976, and this is for kind of a lot of different reasons, but mainly it was that a new generation of Democrats came into office in 1974. It was a reaction to Watergate. Now, ironically, Patman, as the head of the banking committee, had actually been the first Democrat to investigate Watergate in 1972 before the election. And he fought with Nixon, and ultimately his own party refused to allow him to get a subpoena into the Nixon White House. And so this new generation gets elected in 74, but this generation, and this is Bill Clinton's generation, they don't care about what Democrats have traditionally cared about, which is banking power and corporate power and monopolies. Instead, they're thinking about the Pentagon, right? They're thinking about environmentalism. They're thinking about a whole bunch of kind of a different vision of social justice that was created in the 1950s that airbrushed all of the fights that we used to have about corporate power out of our collective memory. And this is the Watergate baby generation. And then behind the scenes, one of the first things that happened is the bankers manipulated them into voting Patman out of his committee assignment chairing the banking committee. And so the bankers managed to finally, in the end, get rid of Wright Patman. And then later, a few months later, he died. But that was the moment, 1975, when they got rid of Patman, in which the Democratic Party adopted a new philosophy of cooperating with concentrated capital. And that same Congress, they got rid of the laws that were protecting the American independent retailer and manufacturer from chain stores. And so in 1970, Walmart has $30 million, $40 million of revenue. By 1980, it has $1 billion of revenue. And this is because in 1975, Congress, this Democratic Congress, this Watergate baby Congress, gets rid of some of the pricing rules that had constrained chain stores. And then and they start doing deregulation. And this is the Democrats who are doing it because they believe in it, right? And Ralph Nader is actually pushing deregulation.
All right, hold on one second. So I want to get into Ralph Nader, but I just want to just sort of plant a flag here and just say, I think in the past, I think we've talked to you about this, about the Atari Democrats. We've done a couple of interviews with Lily Geismer. This era, there was a lot of things going on within the Democratic Party. This was almost one feature of it, but it was all sort of emanating around a similar push, right? Where the Democrats largely, abandon labor. Maybe that's or I should say unions in particular, on some level to make ostensibly the primaries more democratic in some ways. And we also see the adoption of what you call social justice, or maybe emancipation movements, or environmentalism. Other issues become to the fore. How much, though, we should say at this point, like when Patman is jettisoned, we should also say that he was part of his coalition was built on a certain amount of racism. Yes, is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, that's true. So yes, that's right. He had voted. So Patman has an interesting relationship with race. This is very complicated. But in the 1920s, he fought against the Klan. Right, in rural Texas, he was very opposed to the Klan.
And we should say this is when the Klan was basically, I think there was 6 million card-carrying members in 1920 out of a population of 100 million. That's a lot of people to be proud Klan members, right? Who knows if there was any ashamed ones, but that's a lot. That's a huge portion of the population.
Yeah, the mayor of Portland, Oregon, and Portland, Maine were both Klan in 1922. It was a mainstream movement that was based on, it's fascinating. But Patman was opposed to the Klan. And Patman also did a bunch of things that were he made sure that economic power, he tried to distribute economic power regardless of race. He got the first black member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve on the board in the 1960s. He passed the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is an anti-discrimination statute in, I guess, 69 or 70, actually going around his own committee. But he also voted for segregation in the early 50s and was a signer of the Southern Manifesto. And he said very explicitly in the 70s why he did that, which is, I would have lost my seat in rural Texas if I hadn't. And he was getting, there were always primary candidates that the far right wing was putting up against him, saying he was insufficiently dedicated to the cause of segregation. But what happened by 1975 is not that there was nobody in 75 really pushed Patman out because of race. So that wasn't the issue. And he had defenders in Congress who were black, and he had people in Congress who were black who opposed him. The issue was just, and I talked to a bunch of the Watergate baby members. They were just like, oh, he was too old. And the neoliberal generation that emerged in 1975, it's not that they were like, oh, race is actually what matters, versus the older generation who were saying, oh no, actually race doesn't matter. It's all about economic power. That's not what the debate was. The debate were two different visions of racial justice. And one of the visions of racial justice, which was also about economic justice, was we need to have a democracy and undo the institutional concentrations of power that enable discrimination of both against African Americans and women and the small shopkeeper. And the other, and this was the neoliberal framework, was basically we need to allow discrimination against the small shopkeeper and against the little guy. But we need to make sure that, in this kind of greed is good paradigm, that nobody exploits gender or racial identity to advantage themselves. They can do other things. They can exploit fraud. They can exploit corruption. But that is a no-no. So now both of these visions of a kind of multicultural oligarchy and a multicultural democracy have embedded in them a vision of social justice and a vision of racial justice. But they are different. I wouldn't say that the Patman vision, which really comes back from Brandeis, you could go back and, Frederick Douglass hated monopolies. And there's a whole, sort of interesting racial dynamic here. That one, it's not, I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, Patman was racist and this new generation wasn't. I think anyway, so that's just a,
but I mean, put aside
different vision.
Right. But I mean, put aside, whatever Patman's actual feelings were, right? I mean, clearly he was constrained by a racist constituency. And I guess really in terms of, because ultimately what you're writing about is power, right? And at the end of the day, like I say, what was in his heart, or even what was really relevant is to what extent he could push the limits of his constituency's patience. And to what extent?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the laws that we don't think of as anti-discrimination measures, like anti-chain store laws or laws that prevent, monopolization, that those are actually also very important civil rights laws that we just don't think of as such. And those are the laws that Patman was protecting and that Brandeis was protecting, and that, those are the first laws that Bork attacked, and those are the laws that the Watergate baby generation got rid of. So that's what I'm saying. It's not that like Patman couldn't. Yeah, I mean he voted for segregation. There's no getting around that, and it was that's an immoral thing to do. What I'm saying is that the neoliberal generation, the deal that was cut in 1975 and 76, was a deal to entrench a different form and much more pernicious form of racism than the one that came out of the New Deal. That's all this is about. You destroy black banks. You destroy black stores. You destroy black economic power. That is a form of racism that is extremely vicious. It just happens through monopolization and predatory pricing, and we don't sort of see it as kind of a civil rights problem, but we should, and that is an ideological flaw in the way that the civil rights movement has kind of thought about the world since the 1975 or so. I mean, neoliberalism is everywhere. It is in the civil rights movement today. It is in the way that we think about race today, and that's a problem, right?
Right, and I guess that's where I'm trying to get at, is just sort of examine the difficulty. It seems to be is that and stipulating that I think you're right, like the sort of the material implications in terms of how it impacts a race of neoliberal policies in many ways are more dramatic than long term, at least in terms of accruing power for these communities. Let me
put it in a more stark way. Obama's a black president, right? He oversaw the largest theft of black wealth in our lifetimes, and maybe in 80 years. Okay, we have no way to talk about that because the neoliberal framework of race is designed to obscure power, and it's a racist framework. It's not as bad as Jim Crow, but it was a reactionary turn in 1975 and 1976, so that we cannot honestly talk about race. Nobody can honestly talk about race because that is what happened. That's what happened in 2008 to 2014. And I brought this up over and over and over, and Democrats cannot come to grips with it. They can't handle it because they are enthralled to the neoliberal framework on power and money and business and race and everything else. And I wrote this book to explain what happened, to explain why we're in this framework. But I don't accept, the framing of the way that we talk about race is fundamentally dishonest today.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I had that conversation. I think in the lead up to the 2012 election, actually. But I'm not disagreeing with that assessment. But it doesn't tell. I'm also suggesting that there's another half of that story, which is that it doesn't strike me as a coincidence that Patman came from a background that, and I'm not talking about him personally, but his constituency was also happened to be racist. And you and I may or may not agree or disagree, I don't know, on the implications of their racism as terms of how it materially impacts, black people, let's say. And I'm not even sure that, you and I can assess like what's the most important thing there, and it's not really relevant to the point I'm making.
The 1920s were a fascist era. I mean, let's just call Jim Crow what it was in the South. It was fascism. Like that's and it was sustained terrorist violence against black people. It was not as bad against poor white people, but it did disenfranchise poor white people, and it particularly singled out black people with economic power. Those were the people who were often the targets of lynchings. Those were the people. That's why they burned down, Black Wall Street in Tulsa. Jim Crow was a system that was designed to keep black people in servitude by attacking by the foundations of their economic power. Now, Patman broke from that somewhat because he was trying to deal with breaking the hold that concentrated Northern capital, which was an important part of Jim Crow, by the way. He was trying to say, we're going to break from that. And then the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s built on top of the New Deal and said, no, we're actually, now that we've kind of shown that there can be an imperfect democracy, we're going to try to let all people, black and white and women and gay, we're going to try to let them all into this democracy. The whole point is that in 1975, the Watergate babies, and then they got corrupted in the 1980s, but the Watergate babies decided that democracy did not incorporate economic power, right? And that is a deeply, deeply reactionary thing to do. And you can go back and say, Patman's constituents were racist. Absolutely. And you can go back to, the 1870s and discover kind of why that racism was created, why that was engendered. Right. And that was a propaganda campaign after the Civil War, put forward, actually after the financial crisis of 1873. It was put forward by Northern capital. So the fight here is complicated and always has to do with political and economic power, and it manifests itself through racial terrorism. But to just kind of like the way that we talk about the problem today airbrushes out all of those questions of power so that we can get to this libertarian framework of saying, and I'm not saying you're saying this, I'm saying that this is kind of the way that I hear the racial discussion today. It's always just, what is in your heart as an individual, right? Do you believe in equality as an individual or not? And it's like, that doesn't matter. What matters is whether equality is embedded in our institutions of power, because there are always going to be jerks. There are always going to be people that want to bully others. The question in a democracy is whether you can make sure that everybody has equal rights and that no one can use power to bully other people. That's kind of where we have to go. And that is a populist, more democratic approach to addressing the problem of discrimination against the powerful versus the powerless.
All right, and just to be clear, like I agree with that perspective. All I'm suggesting two things. One is that I think there has to be some sensitivity to the lived experience of people who are subjected to racism on an individual level. But that's a I think that's an important thing to say. But I'm also suggesting that there's a relationship between the largely poor white constituency and their relationship to racism that allowed a guy like Patman to function in the way that he was functioning. And I'm just saying that that's the other half of that. There are the forces that took Patman out, but there were also the forces that maintained him. And I'm just suggesting that is also, like an important part of the story. But so
it's an interesting question. Patman Patman's political power actually came through rural postmasters. So before, he had the postmasters essentially delivering his direct mail and talking to people. And the reason people voted for him is because he delivered roads and farm supports and Social Security and rural electrification. That's why he had a whole bunch of people. I mean, if his constituents were just into white supremacy, they wouldn't have picked Patman, because there were often people running against him who were more white supremacist than he was. It was just about delivering the things that they wanted and needed on a material basis. And then when the Civil Rights Act passed and there was black people in his district got the right to vote, they tended to vote for Patman. So it was his political support came from the things that Democrats in 1975, when they transitioned to this kind of concentrated capital, TV-friendly politics, they started losing that immediately. And his supporters, a lot of his supporters were in credit unions and pharmacists and small business people, right? And those people supported Patman, and they supported the Democrats largely because the FTC protected small business from chain stores and protected small business from monopolists. And almost immediately in the late 1970s, when Jimmy Carter, under the influence of Ralph Nader, turned the FTC against small business under the grounds that they needed to protect consumers, and it didn't matter whether we're big or small businesses, we just have to go after and protect consumers and not care about business at all. Almost immediately, the FTC was pushed back aggressively. They lost their constituency base. And then when Reagan came into office in 1981, he effectively just turned out the lights at the FTC, and nobody cared because the small business constituency had lost faith in the FTC and the Democratic Party to do anything. So the loss of that anti-monopoly sentiment, that battle against concentrated power, had really significant impacts. And then when Walmart came in and just chewed up the entire small business constituency in the South and in the Rust Belt, all of those civic leaders who had been the civic leadership for the Democratic Party disappeared, right? And that's the creation of Red and Blue America right there.
All right, and let's get explicit about the sort of three projects that came together, because one of them was that consumer movement, and I think that's a little bit counterintuitive for people to sort of see like the consumer movement being one of the pillars of what has happened with our anti-monopolism in this country, financialization, and then the Chicago School, which is all three are related, but just walk us through those three projects.
Yeah, so the Chicago School, the Law and Economics Movement, I have a chapter in my book about this. They were created in the late 1940s, early 50s, and this was a kind of reconstruction of robber baron capitalism. And so it was a very cynical guy named Aaron Director who trained Milton Friedman, George Stigler, Robert Bork, and he was actually the brother-in-law of Milton Friedman, and he grew up in Portland, Oregon in the 20s. He's Jewish, Russian immigrant. And so he was very cynical about democracy because the people around him were, anti-Semitic and in the KKK. And so he took a very elitist attitude. First, he became a socialist, and then eventually he went to the University of Chicago and was funded by this right-wing lunatic named Harold Lernow, and he created neoliberalism. He broke conservatism away from anti-monopoly thinking. A lot of conservatives had hated the government and labor, but they also hated monopolies. Aaron Director is the guy who said, no, we're going to hate government, we're going to hate labor, but we're going to support monopolies and support concentrated capital. And he built a whole intellectual project. It's centered at the University of Chicago to create the legal tools to unleash concentrated capital and to undo the New Deal. But he wouldn't have been successful unless the second trend, financialization, had not occurred. And this was done by a guy named Walter Wriston at National City or Citibank. So Walter Wriston, again, same thing, got his start in the late 40s, early 50s at National City. The banking system was really heavily controlled. And he's the most important banker since J.P. Morgan. And he's the guy who really led early deregulation, had bitter fights with Wright Patman in the 1960s over undoing the New Deal financial controls, particularly around where banks could get deposits. And when he undid those New Deal controls in 1961 with something called the negotiable certificate of deposit, all of a sudden you saw massive increases in capitalization in the stock market. You saw what was called the go-go years, and conglomerates, which were an early prelude to mutual funds, the early prelude to the 1980s and financial power. And that started slamming into the real economy in the late 1960s, and particularly in 1970, when the train system, Penn Central, much of the train system in the Northeast went bankrupt. It was the largest bankruptcy in American history. It was sort of the Enron of its day. And that's what actually led to the conservatives business elite deciding to organize politically. So that's why they wrote the Powell memo. That's why they did a bunch of the kind of things that we just think, oh, they got greedy in the early 70s. It's like, no. What happened is the financial system was in crisis. Corporate America was in crisis, and they started to have a political debate about what to do. And it was because financialization had slammed into the real economy, had bankrupted the train system, and it's because of the forces that Walter Wriston had let loose. Patman had been fighting him, but he wasn't able to totally stop it, although he did stop a bailout of Penn Central. And then the third force is the consumer rights movement. And this is really John Kenneth Galbraith and Richard Hofstadter, again, late 1940s, early 50s. All of this is in the specter of the McCarthy reactionary movement. Some of the funders of the McCarthy Red Scare were also behind the law and economics movement. So these guys were corporate liberals, and they rewrote the history. They were very important. So Galbraith and Hofstadter rewrote our history, and they got rid of the idea that fights happened in the late 19th century around the money trust and corporate power. They said that's all fake. In fact, what was happening is these farmers who were fighting the bankers and railroads, they weren't really fighting them. They were actually just Anglo-Saxons who were afraid of losing their WASP privilege. It was a fight over what was called status anxiety. And then with that new framework, Galbraith developed this something called affluence, which was this notion that America was just this endlessly affluent society, and we didn't need to fight over corporate power anymore. We had figured that out. There was no inequality, or inequality was not important. Monopolies were progressive, all this stuff that he kind of framed. And he taught the entire counterculture, because he was very opposed to the war in Vietnam, and in many ways was heroic, but his ideas were catastrophic. And the counterculture in the 1960s and learned from Galbraith and Hofstadter and C. Wright Mills and a whole bunch of people who hated small business and didn't want to have debates over corporate power, or they were just socialists. They learned to not care about monopolies. And then in the 1970s, they became this consumer rights movement led by Ralph Nader, who said, this is very similar to what consumer rights people said in the 1910s and 20s, that production doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is consumers. And so chain stores can be good. And the only thing that matters is sort of price and safety and quality. Workers didn't matter. Unions don't matter. Big business, big unions, both corrupt. Big government, corrupt. The only thing that matters is consumerism. And then they got fooled. In the 1970s, you have this crisis in corporate America caused by financialization, and then you have the law and economics movement, and you have the last of the populists like Phil Hart, Hubert Humphrey, and Wright Patman saying, save the shopkeeper, break up big business, and then you have this consumer rights movement that's sitting in the middle, and they end up mostly aligning with the law and economics guys and pushing for deregulation and pushing for financialization. And they didn't know what they were doing. Nader didn't know what he was doing, but he does things like he creates the corporate right to free speech. He pushes for banking deregulation and airline deregulation and trucking deregulation. And that's why the Carter administration is a catastrophe. And then Reagan gets into office. By the time Reagan gets into office, there is no more debate, right? The left, Patman's died, Phil Hart's died, Humphreys died, and there's no one to carry the torch. And so this new generation of Watergate babies is in charge, and they basically agree with Reagan that corporate concentration is inevitable, is progressive, is natural, is scientific.
And just to explain to people like why they felt that way, and this is how we got the sort of the Borkian version of antitrust, is that this concentration leads to cheaper products. Maybe, theoretically, maybe we can get it overnight delivered to us now. I mean, it's all based upon looking at the world through the lens exclusively of how much stuff can I consume and in its most convenient way.
That's right. And our legal framework was structured so that we stopped caring about competitive processing concentrations of power, essentially a big is bad skepticism, and moved towards as you put it, consumer price. And so something like Google or Facebook, they both offer free. They're free. You don't have to pay for them with money. Obviously, you pay with other things. But it's very hard for the way that we interpret antitrust laws today to see the concentration of power in the hands of Google or Facebook or Amazon. It's not impossible. It's just that there are other things going on.
These are like externalities, right? I mean, this is sort of a classic case of some externalities insofar as that we don't realize where we're paying for these free services or these reduced price services in the because it's doesn't show up necessarily as dollars as much as it does. I mean, ultimately it might, but it shows up in the context of political power and sort of, I guess, things that are a little bit less tangible in the context of society.
Well, it's just that we as consumers aren't the ones paying the price. The people that are paying the price are the publishers and the sellers through Amazon, right? So traditionally, you would have like a seller going through an Amazon or like the Standard Oil fight was between Wildcatters and Standard Oil as the distributor of the oil. It wasn't necessarily about consumer prices, although there was some of that. And so it's like if you're looking at Walmart or you're looking at Amazon or you're looking at Google, you don't look on the consumer side for the problem. You look on the producer side. It's the workers, it's the suppliers, it's the manufacturers getting screwed. So if we wanted to apply the law like we used to, it'd be easy to find the harm. It's just that the harm is not necessarily when you log into your Facebook account. It's the death. It's the fact that Facebook is appropriating the revenue, the advertising revenue that used to go to the New York Times. Facebook is now getting it because they're able to take the data effectively from every publisher on the internet. They're able to coercively take that data and then outcompete them because data is really important in terms of selling advertising. So it's like, it's not hard to figure out how to use the law to attack the concentration of power. It's just that if you're seeing things from the consumer standpoint instead of from a citizen standpoint or a producer standpoint, then you don't see the power.
Right. That's my point, is that these externalities are in a different currency, if you will, or just a different silo of our existence, which has been largely devalued. I mean, I think at least in the popular culture. I mean, I've heard you, talk about the, just the implications of the blogs when Google basically came in and Bigfooted everybody and dried up all the advertising revenue, and the implications of that just in terms of like the different voices we hear.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's we are increasingly living in an autocracy in the commercial side of our lives, right? So we get bossed around, whether you're a chicken farmer, you're an Uber driver, or you're an engineer at Boeing. Like, you increasingly have less and less agency. You might have a nicer servitude depending on where you are, but it's not a surprise that as people get used to being bossed around in the commercial sector, in the trade that they do, that they increasingly get used to being bossed around in the political sector. And that's why you see rising autocracy. That's what Trump is. That's also what you see all over the world. Monopolization is a form of autocracy. It's a private government. That's what's going on. We are having these mini private governments linked together by Wall Street, organizing our society.
So how I still have a lot I wanted to get to, but, and I guess the question is sort of, how do you, what's the best way to tackle this? But how do you get people to care? How do you say?
They do care.
What's that?
They do care. In Goliath, I go into this. They do care. I think people just don't have the language to understand what to do. And they don't have the language to think of themselves as citizens. So in Goliath, I talk about the preface is about how we just didn't know that this was our heritage, right? And I wrote this book so that people would understand that the history of America in the 20th century, which is really the history that's America was kind of the central area of debate in the world for most of the 20th century. That history is about the heritage. That's our heritage, and the suspicion that we feel towards concentrated power, which we all feel, is very American. right? The idea that we want fair markets, that we want to get rid of the financier manipulating us as a political matter, that is deeply embedded in the American experiment. And we have to know that in order to reclaim our liberties as a free people.
But what if somebody says, like, all that sounds great, but I like, I like just being able to go on my computer and I want a pair of sneakers and it comes here in 2 days.
Well, look, ultimately, we're going to have to make the argument for freedom, right? That's just the reality. It's like if somebody really wants 2-day shipping and they're willing to give up their liberty for 2-day shipping, and that's the thing that they care about most in the world, we're going to lose that. Right. We're going to lose. We lose our freedom. We lose our democracy. But the reality is you can have 2-day shipping without losing your democracy. Like none of these, you can have flight without having American Airlines charge you baggage fees. There's nothing inherent about the technology that commands a certain political regulatory schema. However, ultimately, this is a question of values, and it is a question of whether we want to be a free people or whether we don't. And that's the debate that we're having. That's the debate that Bernie, that Warren, that Trump, that Buttigieg, that they're all articulating their position on that question. And some people are saying, yeah, you know what, I am willing to sell my heritage, as Brandeis put it, for a mess of pottage, right? As a consumer, you're willing to do anything for that 2-day shipping. And there are others who are saying, no, I want to live in a society where I am not in servitude to others.
And I would add, there's also, there are broader implications in terms of what we're doing. We pay that price in other political decisions and arguably things like wage stagnation and et cetera, when we are, signing up for that type of monopoly. All right. So lastly.
Right. It's not like we're living in an economic paradise.
Right.
It's like the whole framework is ridiculous, but like even accepting that.
All right. So lastly, Warren and Bernie, what, from your perspective, because I think there are, folks in these parts who would argue that it's not, the difference between them is not of a matter of degree, but rather of a kind. What's your perspective on that?
I don't think there's really much difference ideologically. I think they're different. They have different political priorities, different political styles. But, Bernie used to carry around Wright Patman reports when he would walk around Vermont in the 70s from the banking committee talking about chain banking. Elizabeth Warren, she knows Patman. She very much comes out of that Patman style opposition to concentrated power, the hearings, the rigor, the anti-monopolism. It's both. Both of them effectively want to distribute a little bit of property to everybody. They both kind of have a Brandeisian frame. They both are essentially New Deal Democrats. It's the same tradition. They obviously have a different styles, maybe different approaches to gaining political power. A lot of the attempts to explain one of them as kind of inherently more, better or whatever. It's just it's kind of annoying. Warren is a much stronger bureaucratic leader. She will ride a bureaucracy to do things. Bernie is much more. He's a more capable communicator to the broad public. I don't think that you can say that one of them is kind of better. They are different. I am not convinced that either one of them is perfect. I think there are problems with both. I think there are benefits to both, but by and large, the disagreement over Bernie and Warren comes from the basic fact that Obama was a terrible president and neither side can admit it. And so when a lot of Warren's accomplishments are in preventing Obama from doing the horrible things that he really wanted to do, and she can't brag about that because Democrats love Obama and she has to get their votes. And I think what Bernie was really doing in 2016 was running against the shitty legacy of Obama, but he can't brag about that because Democrats like Obama. So that's really the subtext for all of this. And I think there are legitimate grounds for criticism of both of them, but I just don't think that philosophically they really disagree.
And you don't think there is the relevance of some programs being means tested versus universality that doesn't as a political tactic or mechanism in which to sort of raise an awareness of people's role beyond a consumer? None of that moves you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you could just as easily say, Warren says she wants to break up big tech, and Bernie just doesn't. Bernie wants to say, oh, we need an antitrust attorney general who will enforce the antitrust laws, which is that's a subtle way of not calling for breaking up big tech. But I don't think that Bernie is not going to be aggressive on dealing with big tech. I think that Warren certainly has a more aggressive plan, but I'm not going to I think we all know where Bernie is coming from, in the same way I think we all know where Warren is coming from, or at least, so parsing those kind of small distinctions on kind of these plans it's sort of silly. And I mean, I think you could definitely make the argument that Bernie and his plans on social welfare have been a little bit more left wing, and Warren on her plan on ag and tech have been more populist and more opposed to concentrated power. And I think those are fine debates to have. I think there's legitimate grounds for criticizing the CFPB for not being particularly effective. I think there's legitimate grounds for criticizing Bernie for not really doing much on the foreclosure crisis. I think there's legitimate grounds for going after, for putting sort of both of them through the ringer, and we should do that. But the basic problem is Democrats have been terrible, and Democrats, particularly Obama, was terrible, and we have to reckon with that. And both Warren and Bernie can't fully reckon with it because the Democratic base, including the left, by the way, and we had that debate in 2012. And I remember, I was the only one out there saying this guy's no good, right? And I'm still pretty much one of the only people saying he did a bad job, and we have to reckon with that. That's the fundamental problem here, and that's why this kind of shadow boxing over Warren and Bernie is kind of besides the point.
Fair enough. And people can go back and listen to that conversation that we had. I must have been pre-2012, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I think you've been on a couple of times since then. But and to be fair, we also did have, there was I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but from the Black Agenda report, it was Glenn Ford, actually. I think we had on. Making a similar argument, maybe not necessarily the exact same terms that you were arguing at that time.
I was arguing for voting for third party in 2012, or not voting for Obama, even in swing states. And the guy who was opposed to us was Mitt Romney. I remember at the time people were like, "Oh my gosh, he's the worst! I can't believe Mitt Romney. How dare you?" And it's today Mitt Romney is a hero of the resistance. It was It's embarrassing. People should be embarrassed about their political judgment. It was really bad.
Well, I mean, if it makes any difference, I am not a fan of Mitt Romney's today.
Well, no, that's fair.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Obama or Mitt Romney.
Right.
I mean,
all right,
it's a relative question.
Well, nevertheless. Goliath, the 100-year war between monopoly, power, and democracy. Matt Stoller, really appreciate you coming on today, and think the book is fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. All right, and we will put a link, folks, to Goliath on the in the podcast description and on the blog. And check it out. It's a really important history to understand, and you will enjoy it. It's actually a fun thing to read in tandem with We Got People. Some of the histories bump up against each other a little bit. Fun read, as we say around the Seder house. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. We went a little long today. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. We can't do it without you. And if you're one of those people who listen to the show on a regular basis, want to support the program, join themajorityreport.com. When you do, not only do you get this show commercial free, but you also get extra content every day. And you get the self-satisfaction of knowing that you are a supporter of the Majority Report. And that feels so good. And apparently I've been remiss in mentioning this. And again, you got to have patience for us. But if you want the fun half, but do not have the financial resources, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com and maybe put in the subject line, want the fun half. Send us an email. We don't turn anybody away for financial reasons. If you got a bad attitude, or maybe you and I had a run-in somewhere and we had some type of problem, yeah, we'll turn you away. But but we don't do it for financial reasons. If I don't like your writing style, I don't know. But that's majorityreporters@gmail.com. Don't forget to sign up for the AM Quickie. And today is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Michael, what will be happening on your show?
Krystal Ball will be joining us. Harvey K will be joining us.
We're going to have Harvey K. He's going to spend the whole day
double header.
tomorrow.
Harvey K is going to be here all day, and I believe, and no doubt he would be ready to do a third show after both of those. Very energetic gentleman. We're going to be talking about the global, global anti-austerity uprisings from Lebanon to Chile to Haiti. And why do they get so little press coverage here? Does it fit into the Chomsky model? And a whole bunch of other things. Also, an interview
feels different from the
Hong Kong,
the spring, the
Arab Spring. Very different. And and the Arab Spring had a bigger economic component than was acknowledged at the time too. But very excited to get into that. Plus, some of the election results out of Argentina and Uruguay, a whole bunch of other things, and also a little bit off format. Just did an interview with Kashama Sawant, which will be playing on tomorrow's show. Her election in 2013, I believe it was, to the Seattle City Council was one of these moments that we talk about, the Chicago teacher strikes, Black Lives Matter, the Sanders campaign. And she's running for her third term, and Amazon alone has dumped $1 million into beating her. So, and actually, I'll just say now, you can vote now in Seattle. The election is on November 5th, but they have a mail-in voting system. So this is definitely the time to, pull rank for her. And also, I guess, actually some progressive Democrats as well, who are also being targeted in Seattle. So that was a really important conversation. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, there's a pre-stream at 6 as well. Patreon.com/TMBS, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube, and snag your tickets to Philly. They're over 2/3 sold out with 4 weeks to go.
Jamie is not here, but you can check out The Antifada at patreon.com/The Antifada. Matt?
My Salem Witch Trials episode for Literary Hangover is finally up, where we talk about, among other things, how it represented the final gasp of the theocratic Puritan agricultural community versus the mercantile capitalists. So, for instance, before 1665, 2-to-1, farmers outnumbered merchants on their sort of selectmen, their governing body. And then between 1665 to 1700, merchants would outnumber them 6-to-1. And actually, the agricultural people got their revenge by hanging 19 people and throwing hundreds in prison. So
there you go. So people talk about the rancor in our politics today. Oh, this is exciting for me because Mile and I just got our red string that we're now using for Hunt-A-Killer. And Hunt-A-Killer is the murder mystery subscription box that immerses you in an ongoing detective experience. Does not include red string, but you can get it anywhere. With every delivery, you sift through elaborate case files and evidence, eliminating suspects until you crack the case and catch the killer. Right now, we're doing one. There was a problem with a class reunion. And right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. Hurry to take advantage of this offer. Embrace your inner detective. Folks, this is super fun. I don't know if people do it with their kids, but I'm doing it with my daughter, and it's the only time that we actually talk to each other now. huntakiller.com/majority, 20% off your first box. huntakiller.com/majority. We, of course, will put a link in the podcast and YouTube description. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back.
back, 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 boys back, and the alpha males are back, back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, 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 boys back, and the alpha males are back, 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 back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back, back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back, 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 back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back, 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 back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back, back, back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych.
Fuck them. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black African. And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black.
You see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black.
Come on! Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Oh, folks, it's like today's like the Empire Strikes Back today. Like in terms of the clips that we have. Oh yeah. Like there's some real concern, and you know the arguments about the differences between Warren and Sanders notwithstanding, and obviously, you know, there's been a lot of time spent on differences in terms of foreign policy. I think where their differences are most stark, and various people have different perspectives on whether the difference between Bernie and Warren are of kind and of or degree, or whether the constraints of our current political environment diminish those differences, or whether the way in which Bernie Sanders is looking to win will fundamentally alter the calculation of those constraints. All of these are conversations that I think we've had, and they're worth continuing to have. But one thing is clear, there's a whole mess of people who don't want either one of them. And let's go to Donnie Deutsch first. Our millionaires parade today. Donnie Deutsch has a real problem with Medicare for all. Now, remember, he had said in the past that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, he will vote for Donald Trump. And that, for a branding guy, he did not appreciate that Morning Joe is trying to pretend like they actually, they're just watching all this stuff happen from afar. And you're not supposed to say that you would support Donald Trump even though I think there's a lot of those people who, at the very least, argue they will. Now, by a lot, I mean tens of thousands in places like New York and California or Florida. To be fair, Florida, they might have a little more implications there. A lot of those people go down there. They oddly spend 6 months out of the year, 6 months and a day out of the year, because of the sun gives you vitamin D and helps you fight off certain cancers. And also it allows you to escape income tax, state income tax.
Vitamin D means decreased taxes.
Exactly. Vitamin decreased taxes. But here is Donnie Deutsch on the Real Time with Bill Maher program, talking about something he doesn't seem to have any clue about.
Might be seen as a way to help more Americans. I'll tell you one thing, though. You tell 160 million Americans that they can't choose their private insurance, you're going to lose an election. Right. And these people are smoking crack. You know, forget about not even being able to pay for it, $34 trillion. My grandfather was a cop, okay? And my mother was a school teacher, and they worked really hard to put me in a position where I can buy the kind of insurance I want. And if I can't, or the people on this panel, I can't buy it for my children, we are going backwards. We're fucking Denmark, okay? But remember the problem...
Okay, pause it for 1 second. First off, we're
fucking the best healthcare in the world, okay?
There is not a policy expert that you could find that wouldn't say, well, Denmark actually has, I think, objectively speaking, far better healthcare situation than we do. A. B, for all of Donnie Deutsch's toughness with his dad, who was a cop, my understanding is, too, that also, by the time that he ended, was left Donnie Deutsch millions of dollars in some Wall Street stuff. You start as a cop. It's not where you finish, necessarily. And I will also tell him that, guess what? Your father, when he was a cop, guess what he didn't have? Private health insurance. It was given to him through his union.
And his mom, who was a teacher.
And his teacher, right? Okay. Both of them making money off of the public dole. Well, whatever. That's good. I'm glad they were. You have to be so out of touch to think that 160 million people are going to be upset because they're not going to have their private insurance. I mean, I have a buddy who is a drug counselor, and he sees it on both ends. He sees it with his patients, and he sees it with his own family. He's like, I've heard you talk about private health insurance, saying it's horrible and this and that. You're underselling it. He says he sees so many people turned away who desperately need the treatment. And he also in a position where his private employer only pays his health insurance. So he's going to pay for the rest of the family out of his pocket. Nobody likes, well, no, I shouldn't say that. I am 100% sure that the vast majority of that 160 million people could give two Fs if they don't have private health insurance. They just want health insurance. In fact, they probably don't even want health insurance. They just want to be able to go to the doctor and see the doctor and not have to deal with the tremendous amount of hassle that's involved and the expense that's involved. Questioning whether they're going to get their health care. It's absurd. And Denmark, yes, fantastic health insurance. So,
including steadily increasing life expectancy. I think a woman's life expectancy is 82 years old as of 2015.
In Denmark?
Yes.
Well, whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to live in that situation if those broads could have the same health care that my dad worked so hard to bequeath me as a trust fund baby.
Right, exactly. Like we should have, it's one thing to say like, my dad worked very hard for that castle and he wanted to pass it down and keep it in the family. But the idea that like your legacy is being able to provide health care for your kid, what kind of effed up society are we living in? Like that's like I give you the family coat of arms. you're going to be able to get 85% of your surgery covered.
Guess
if you
what?
ever get
The
sick again.
vaccines,
Like, honestly, like, is this
the
really,
vaccines are fully covered, son.
is this something that we want as a society?
My grandfather was an Aetna man. My father was an Aetna man.
Yeah, no, but this is it. This is exactly right.
It's just an early version of this sentiment. This is from Glenn Greenwald's interview with Lula, where Lula says, you know, everybody made strides under my leadership, but because the airports became more egalitarian, rich people had a problem with it.
Yeah,
check this out for a second.
Foi o único momento na história em que os mais pobres tiveram um crescimento percentual acima dos mais ricos. Não que os ricos não ganharam, mas que os pobres cresceram percentualmente mais. Foi a única vez e começou a incomodar. Você deve ter ouvido no aeroporto do Galeão, no aeroporto de Congonhas, o aeroporto parece uma rodoviária. Tá cheio de pobre aqui andando, gente que não sabia nem frequentar aeroporto.
Yeah.
That's the same thing. That's Donnie Deutsch.
Similar attitude. Fortunately, there are people who appreciate the idea of grotesque wealth inequality and all that comes with it, the enormous benefits that corporate entities have had under Donald Trump. The economy's slowing. The numbers are in. It's not hard to find it. You can just Google it and find out that all of the tax cuts that were given to corporate America went into paying off wealthy people who were shareholders, not in creation of jobs, not in research and development, not in expanding the pie, as it were. Wages have been largely stagnant. But this took guts to do this type of tax cut. How do I know? Well, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva tells us so on Axios's HBO show.
We're in the middle, as you know, of a crazy election cycle here in the US, and there's lots of people accusing lots of other people of being socialists. And what do you think when you hear this rhetoric?
Been there, done it, don't want to see it ever again.
Could it happen to this country?
I don't think so. I think that the Americans are so pragmatic, there is no way that they would go for the craziness of mediocrity. And this is the danger of communism, that it says there is somebody who knows it all and can tell everybody how it should be done.
Now, we live in a country where the president is someone who thinks he knows it all.
Well, you sell the U.S. short. And also just
Despite
to give credit.
The man in the White House.
Just to give a credit to the leadership here, the United States is one of the better performing economies, and it is because it had the bravery to use a tax reform to spur more growth.
So you're in favor of the Trump tax cuts?
I'm in favor of countries using their policy space to make the economy more vibrant and ultimately to make the lives of people better.
Yeah.
Policy space, that's what I'm talking about.
That's pretty stunning. I talk about lack of confidence in the International Monetary Fund. Now, I'd be a little bit worried. In fact, all our data shows all the I do appreciate the fact that she did the bait and switch with, like, he says socialism and she says communism. It's a little bit of a sleight of hand there.
There might be a little bit of biographical trauma there,
yeah,
from
indeed.
The Eastern Bloc. But I will say, at the same time, this woman spent a lot of her career in the World Bank, whose job is theoretically to alleviate poverty, even as it has increased poverty across the globe. And the IMF, of course, is currency regulation, which it helps prop up currencies by giving loans while demanding that people gut their public health and education systems.
So there you go.
She's exactly who should be running these institutions, which is why we should abolish or radically transform them immediately.
Yeah, the system she subscribes to is the people that have the money know it all.
Right.
When Felix Salmon thinks you're acting like an oligarch, you know you have a problem.
Yeah. Felix Salmon was giving her to look like IMF chief on AM Talk.
Right. Interesting. So here's a funny story. As you know, I used to be in show business, so I would talk to people who were on different crews and would work on different reality shows at different times. And I remember having to tell a guy who needed the cash, like, hey, man, don't worry about it, because he felt so sick to his stomach about the way that Dr. Drew on his addicted show, whatever that was. What was that show that he had where he had all these addicts in an apartment? Was the Attic House or something like that? How horrible and exploitive the whole thing was, and how they would sort of like create a certain amount of tension and drama with the idea that these guys would fall off the wagon, and how disgusted he was. And this is what the guy told me, and I would just say, like, look, dude, you need to pay for your family if you can't find another job. You know, I don't know what to tell you. But speaking of which, here's Dr. Drew now on Fox Nation. What does this doctor have to say?
It was an ideology. Whenever you have ideology grab people in a profession or a leadership position, this is the exact same thing that's happening with homelessness. The ideology is this is a housing crisis, period, end of story. It's income inequality. It is not. It is a mental health crisis. And if you don't wake up from that theological fog, more people are going to die. 3 people dying in the streets every day in Los Angeles County, 3 every day. And people who get in the way of treating those people are murderers. They are. And I'm sick of it.
We're all sick of it.
Yeah.
All right, Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Drew's celebrity rehab.
Now, how do you propose to provide services for someone who does not have a place of residence? I mean, what is the proposal here? Right? Like, you know, specific individuals. But how do you propose, like, if someone has mental health issues, okay, and needs to be treated with therapy or medication, how does Dr. Drew propose to provide these services to people who have no address, who have no home, who have no security at night, who are sleeping in the rain? How do you propose to do this? Like, you need to triage people. You need to give them a place to live before you can provide them any type of services on a consistent basis. This is just fully absurd.
Well, in addition to that, I mean, how do you also incidentally synchronize? Like, I'm tired of people getting in the way of funding proper public mental health. Like, I don't even know what he's saying.
And that's just, if I was to stipulate that the problem with everybody who is homeless,
well, of course,
is that
not.
they have a mental illness.
To the extent that, and I'm also sure that some of them, to the extent they do, it's because they've been being homeless, which tends to take a toll on every aspect of your health.
We also have a huge amount of children who are homeless. That is not a function of, it is simply a function of they don't have an ability to get a home. And if he's arguing we can't stop once we give them residence, we need to give these folks support, great. But that's not what the argument is. Unbelievable.
We have some more if we want to see it.
Yeah, let's see more of this.
This is, I guess, right before.
Paying people to leave New York to go to places like Hawaii.
Yeah, it's incredible. But it makes perfect sense to me, given how the people in power today seem to be trying to solve the homeless problem. It's so appealing to go, you've been in our shelter for 90 days, which is what they have to do in order to be eligible. You're a family. Pat on the back, we will take care of you. We will give you a year of free rent to get you back on your feet, which is anathema to the problem. Right. The problem is not that you need a housing. It's not that you need a period of time to get your act together. You need mental health services.
Of course.
And if you do not provide the treatment and the vocational rehab, you are committing people to chronic difficulties.
You're just warehousing them.
You're not even warehousing them. These things are progressive. These are all progressive illnesses that you see on every street in this country. They are progressive illnesses, and they end in demise. They end in death. big majority are drug and alcohol. It's the last chapter of our opioid crisis.
How do you not?
Our...
How do you? How do you fault giving people a home? Now, if you're saying like we can't stop there, we need to continue to spend more money to provide services, but that's not what he's saying here. And it's just absurd. You need a home. You need a place to live to have access to these services. You need a home to receive these services. He's just driving around in his car in LA and saying, here's a problem. Is he a real doctor?
I mean, this is like, I don't know what ideology he's talking to. Like, I remember this from college, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like shelter's the bottom base of it.
There you go. Boom. Purple.
There's my leftist
green
ideology.
Yep. But the guy who exploited people's addiction, he should know. He should know. Maybe he's just afraid that if they all get homes, that they'll come in there with a reality camera and a director.
Or he's trying to build up a number of studios as quickly as possible to film them simultaneously.
I wonder if we went through the list of people who were on celebrity rehab and see how well the rehab took.
Not great. All right, let's look in on one more a couple of. As you know, Donald Trump was booed at the Houston Astros, Washington Nationals World Series game 5, right? And let's just remind you of one of the other cheers that we heard. We call it a Bronx cheer when they boo, but I don't know what you would call this cheer. There it is. Lock him up. Lock him up when they see the picture of Donald Trump on there. Now, folks, as you know, that cheer was organized by all of the Democratic candidates running for office and also Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They were all there. They were all leading everyone in. No, it was
lock him up, everyone.
It was a organic, spontaneous reaction to this the image of Donald Trump at the game. Everybody wanting to make sure that he wasn't enjoying himself. But this is a great opportunity for folks to flash their bona fides as being objective and just being able to analyze this and longing for the days of normalcy. Here's Mika and Joe just lamenting the fact that we hear this type of cheer at a baseball game.
But again, I speak to the lock him up chants.
Yeah.
It's un-American. It started with Donald Trump. In fact, he's made it a centerpiece of his campaign rallies.
We find it sickening when it happens at his rallies.
I find it kind of. Can I just take a moment to just enjoy that image of these 6 almost total replicas?
Mummified.
I mean, you almost can see, you could line them up in terms of their hair loss and their aging as they go along, and thank God they all wore different ties or it would be extremely confusing. That's not relevant. Well, maybe it is a little bit. This whole idea that we need to project some sense of normalcy and look at Donald Trump. It's true. It started with Donald Trump and now it's actually gone to some people who go to a baseball game.
At his rallies, I find it kind of sickening to watch people leering at the president.
We are Americans, and we do not do that. We do not want the world hearing us chant, lock him up, to this president or to any president. That's what I'm saying. Let's hope as we move forward, maybe this is one less fascist tactic he and his supporters use during chants, that you were going to actually imprison your political opponents. So let's leave that behind and just.
I don't.
This is pretty rudimentary stuff. I'm gonna lay this out for folks, and you see, this is like one of those things. One of these things doesn't fit with the other, a presidential candidate and or a president, right? Particularly a president who has access to all the levers of power. Presidential candidate has some power too. They have a huge platform. Calling for someone, let's just even stipulate that they have the same levels of guilt or non-guilt. Calling for someone to be locked up versus people at a baseball game who have the ability to get a beer or a hot dog. Does anybody see the dynamic difference here that it makes these two examples completely different?
They're both fascism.
They're both. It is, and you know, I think it's easy to assume that this isn't important, but this is important because this is the way you create a textbook version of false equivalency. Because it's not just a question of elevating drunken bleacher fans at a baseball game to having the power of the presidency. But it's a way of saying that the power of the presidency, it's irrelevant in this equation. I mean, this is true across all issues in politics. Like you're going to completely ignore the dynamic between people, the power between people. And here is Joe's response on a tweet. So let's see if I've got this straight. When crowds chant, "Lock her up" toward Hillary, it is illiberal and anti-American. I agree. But when crowds chant the same word toward Trump, it's suddenly a fulsome exercise of sacred First Amendment rights. What hypocritical clowns. Here's the thing. When crowds chant "Lock her up" toward Hillary, it was literally led by people at their convention. It was literally led by the presidential candidate. It was literally led by a president who was egging them to do that. The issue isn't the crowds. It is the person who has enormous power marshaling this from the crowds. This is not like the king rides through the town and people throw tomatoes at him. This is like the king saying to his soldiers, find those people. I mean...
And the one similarity, though, to be just fair, is that they're both fascism.
Right.
That's right. Lock her up.
I mean...
Ever mentally healthy,
is Joe being disingenuous here, or is it possible that he just can't wrap his brain around the difference? That'll be an extra credit question for you folks.
I mean, back in American Revolution times, we used to tar and feather people as a usual part of public life and protest.
You know what's actually...
He says, he goes on to say, if you think that democracy is strengthened by calling for the arrest of political opponents, you're as ignorant and as illiberal as Trump himself. Delete your account and read some civics. Stop embarrassing yourself. Now he's also changing the terrain of the debate with this second part of the tweet, right? Where it's like, you don't have to think that democracy is strengthened to think that these are not equivalent. And the fact of the matter is, those people in those bleachers are not political opponents of Donald Trump, except for the extent that they don't want, they're actually his constituents. He's president.
You know what is actually a much less important point, but a funny contrast. I and dozens of other patriots at the Bernie rally in Queens were starting to try to get a lock him up chant going regularly, specifically while the mayor of San Juan, who's a co-chair of Bernie's campaign, was talking about Trump's conduct in Puerto Rico, which, by the way, I'm a make your case person. There's some things you could talk about with Clinton as an example in Haiti where you might get me to go on that chant for what it's worth. And I think Donald Trump has done any number of things where you could just say, lock him up. if we're going to lock people up.
I think it would be a problem for a political candidate to do that.
I happen to agree with that. But that being said,
the
crowds were out. Me and my fellow patriots were heartily making that point. And the mayor of San Juan could have just ignored us. She could have even just smirked a little bit, given a little nod. But she said, no, we're going to vote him out.
There you go.
So there you go, Joe.
That's how it should work,
You can
baby.
calm down.
Now, I know that Joe spent 10 minutes talking about how much that helped our democracy.
Indeed.
Right? Could you pull that clip, please? I guess we don't have it. Here's Chris Coons getting on the...
I know people can't see it, but Chris Coons, he always just looks so goddamn sad.
Well, have people noticed... Maybe we've been paying more attention to it, but Chris Coons feels his moment coming, folks. He can see where this is going. And he has been on this path for some time when he said that we should institute the filibuster if we take back the Senate to give Republicans the ability to kill our judicial picks. Not our Supreme Court justice, but also our Supreme Court justice, but our judicial picks across the board. Because Chris Coons, and this is the thing that people have to understand about the Senate, particularly when it comes to Democrats, because the Democratic coalition is much broader than the Republican coalition, it almost doesn't matter where the fault lines are. There are going to be Democrats who rush to that fault line so that they can be right at the fulcrum, so that they can get all the attention. It is very hard for us non-psychopathic people to contemplate that there would be 2 or 3 individuals who are so determined to be the most popular or the most important in the class that they would actually prohibit and inhibit the ability for people to get health care, let's say, or the ability to live fuller, richer lives, or to live or die because they want to be at that fulcrum. Chris Coons is one of those guys. You'll recall he said, I think history is going to judge us that, and I'm of course for it. I'm totally for having women and people who are not white in
it's an idea that I'm really interested in
It's
exploring.
a great idea, but in practice, I think history is going to show that it's led to a lot of polarization. Right? It's important because he of something he drops in this conversation about the fact that some people at a baseball game said "lock him up" to Donald Trump's face.
And Trump attended Game 5 of the World Series in Washington last night. I just want to play the sound from that.
Thank you, Seder.
He was booed, and you can hear the chants there of "lock him up." What do you make of that, Senator?
Well, forgive me. I'm enough of a sort of traditionalist about our institutions that even at a time when
I believe that. Yeah.
I remember a time where it was all just white guys for the most part, and things weren't so polarized. But okay.
Don't forgive me. I'm a traditional.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Go ahead.
That, Senator.
Well, forgive me. I'm enough of a sort of traditionalist about our institutions that even at a time when there is a lot that our president does that I find...
Pause it. I'm sorry. One more time. I know this is annoying, folks, but I will tell you, the institution he's talking about is a baseball stadium. That's what he's talking about, I guess, right? I mean, where did this happen? But go ahead.
A lot that our president does that I find disturbing, offensive, unconventional. I have a hard time with the idea of a crowd on a globally televised sporting event chanting "lock him up" about our president. I frankly think the office of the president deserves respect, even when the actions of our president at times don't. I certainly hope that we won't hear "lock him up" chants at Democratic rallies or at our convention. I think that's one of the most regrettable, even at times despicable, actions by candidate Trump when he was running for president in 2016. It reminds me of things that happen in countries where rule of law is unknown or unestablished, and sort of whipping up public furor on both sides I don't think is constructive or helpful. I understand why crowds in Washington would feel a lot of animus towards our president, given a lot of things that he's done. But frankly, that's why I think those of us in the Senate need to approach the impeachment process seriously in a measured and responsible way, because our very institutions, our Constitution, is at risk by these sorts of the passions that have been unleashed by the politics of the moment.
Who is whipping up anything? Well, what is the institution like? I'm sorry, if you're a traditionalist, then you must know that when you go into the bleacher section or the higher seats of a baseball game, you're going to hear some pretty ugly stuff. I mean, I remember coming down to a Yankees game as a Red Sox fan 35 years ago, and I got news for you. Chris Coons, your ears would fall off of what you heard.
Well, I mean, I'm a traditionalist, and the idea that you can have women on their periods at baseball games, I love the idea of it, but it might not be working out so much.
Doesn't work with the plumbing.
It doesn't work with the...
It's really
science is off. The president's abhorrent, don't get me wrong.
There are children who have been kidnapped and will never see their parents again. There are parents whose kids were kidnapped and they will never see their kids again. The idea that Chris Coons has even 3 minutes to criticize some people at a baseball game who don't want to see an image of Donald Trump is stunning. I mean, honestly, if you feel so obligated to take some type of high road about that, all well and good. But you should say, but in the great scheme of things, let's put this in perspective. There are children who will never see their parents as part of our government policy. So, and those people in that crowd have no power, zero power to do anything in regards to what makes what Donald Trump did so reprehensible. Because when Donald Trump does it as a candidate, when he does it as a president, when he leads send them back or lock her up as a president, it begins to undercut folks' faith in the institutions of our government. When people at a baseball game do it, what does it undercut? The institution of being polite at a ball game? Honestly, this is like it would be childish if it wasn't so disingenuous.
It bums me out to say that only property-owning white males should vote again, but I think if we look at the long line of history, that's probably where we're headed.
So we might want to look at governors picking senators.
There's a lot of people in the Senate Democratic Caucus that won't agree with me. I have to say what I think.
So Joe Biden is out there trying to relaunch. This is Joe Biden 2.0.
2.0, what?
Here he is. This is just stunning to me. Here's Joe Biden. He's on 60 Minutes. Oh, we just got to play the audio, right? Let's do the. Okay. So yeah, it's over my shoulder. So here's Joe Biden, and he's explaining to Nora O'Donnell why why Barack Obama has not endorsed him yet. Now, you'll recall that if Rudy Giuliani was verb, noun, 9/11, and when he ran for office, Joe Biden is verb, noun, Barack Obama. And so he's running his campaign as Barack Obama's vice president. Fine, that's his prerogative. But here is his interesting story as to why he's not being endorsed by Barack Obama.
The Democratic Party has had Jack Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. This is your third run for president. Why Joe Biden?
Well, because I think, as I said, we need somebody who on day one knows exactly what to do, can command the world stage. No one wonders whether I know a great deal about these issues in foreign policy and domestic policy. They're things I've done.
And that might be one of the criticisms, too, that you're offering essentially 4 more years of a Obama-like administration.
Well, let me tell you something. I love the fact that all of a sudden the Democratic Party doesn't think Obama was that great a president.
Note that he's not refuting the premise. I am running on 4 more years of Obama. I just think it's funny that people wouldn't want that.
Obama was that great a president. I find that fascinating.
Some have asked, why hasn't President Obama endorsed you? You guys served together for 8 years.
Because I want to earn this on my own.
Did he offer to endorse you?
No, we didn't even get there. I asked him not to. He said, okay. I think it's better. I think he thinks it's better for me. I have no doubt when I'm the nominee, he'll be out in the campaign trail.
Yeah. Now, folks, remember what Joe Biden's pitch is. This is the most important election ever facing us to save the soul of America. But with that said, I also don't want to get into office and feel like I didn't earn it myself. So I just said, let me do this. This is an existential threat to America, but I also don't want to feel weird about myself when I'm president.
Saving democracy would feel cheap that way.
I don't want to play with a handicap.
Right.
I said, don't do it. Don't endorse me, sir.
Don't you say those words. Don't you do it.
I'll tell you what, Joel, if your retinas can keep it together through the next several months, I'll be out there in the general.
I feel like
I love the way you're.
You see if you pull up that Officer and a Gentleman where he's like, I got no other place to go. I feel like Joe was just like, don't you say it. I want to own this. I want to feel like I earned it. I don't want people to say that I didn't win this.
That was real hope and change the way your teeth fell out. That was great. Way to hold down the legacy.
Does he? I mean, they really couldn't come up with a better response to this. Like, Barack Obama wants to let the people choose. No, it was all about me and my sense of I want to do this on my own because America stands in the balance. And even though I could save America with his help, I don't want to feel bad about myself.
Joe, what are you going to do to get Erdogan in line? Bleed on him? Yeah, but don't worry, I'll endorse you.
I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at that medal that I got and that trophy that I put up there for winning the president. And I'm going to know deep down I didn't get it all on my own.
That sort of appeal to ego, though, might work for your undecided, independent voters in America. Like, nah, dude, I didn't even want to go home with her. I just it happened, man. And that sort of energy, I feel like they would respect that.
Oh, my God.
It's like I told Hunter, I said, do you really want all these board seats? Don't you want to do something on your own? You're 46 years old. You can't even get a girl that isn't your dead brother.
Unbelievable. All right. So here is Joe Biden explaining that he can't possibly be responsible for the super PACs that fund his campaign, even though they stopped it in the past. And even though we have massive amounts of reporting that they made an internal decision to allow the super PACs there. Because why? Joe Biden was running out of money. There is no grassroots support for Joe Biden. They had a watch party in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, incidentally, is in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, incidentally, is a key state that Hillary Clinton won, that Joe Biden has to win. And he appeals to these guys because he's a guy's guy. And I know what it's like, blue collar. Because 45 years ago, before I was a senator, I knew people on the train who were blue collar. So I know what it's like. That's why people love me there. At his Philadelphia watch party for the debate, 0 people showed up. Like literally, I think they have a picture of it. You can find it. 0 people. CNN reported this. Here he is.
Barack was going to come. I told him not to.
I said, don't come.
Stay home.
I want to feel like I'm going to watch myself on the debate. Here is Joe Biden talking about why, here's the guy who's going to save all of us, right? But he can't control these super PACs.
Mr. Biden, why did you drop your discouragement of super PACs?
I didn't look. Here's what I did. I don't have a super PAC. There were people who've come to me and said, we'll contribute X amount of dollars to you. We'll set up a Biden super PAC, and we can direct you. We go the whole thing like other super PACs. I don't want any part of that. But what happened was when President Trump went out and got the folks who love me the most, the NRA and the gun manufacturers and the oil companies and the insurance companies, to spend somewhat excess, so they tell me, $10 million on ads that, fortunately, most of your networks won't run because they're flat-out lies. What I learned after the fact from my folks, there are a lot of people who said, we can't let this stand. They're able to do that. I haven't discouraged them from it, but I haven't encouraged it either. I've just stayed away, just hands off. But if I'm the nominee, and if I win, I promise you, I'm going to continue to push for a constitutional amendment to make sure that there's public funding of elections. I proposed that way back in South Carolina with Fritz Hollings. And I think it's the single most significant thing we can do.
All right, thanks, guys. We got to ride. We got to.
You're bought by billionaires, though. Change your opinion like this.
I didn't change my opinion. I didn't look. They're able to go out and do this. Period. I cannot stop them if I wanted to stop them. It's their right to do it. And so I'm surprised Bernie was saying that because anyway. I'm just kind of surprised.
I'm surprised. So the question was, why have you stopped discouraging people? And it took him about 3 minutes to get to, I'm not discouraging or encouraging anybody. The question was, why did you stop discouraging? And the
whole you didn't want my endorsement thing made more sense than that.
Really, really doesn't like this question, folks. So if you're at a rally or someplace where he's at and you ask him, be prepared. It's not going to be friendly Joe who's going to respond to you. Here is
in your face, Joe.
Yeah, here is in your face, Joe. And listen, and here's the other thing. If you're going to ask this question, try not to be a woman or young, because you know how that pisses Joe off too. Go ahead.
Fuck you. We're going to be okay. Since you're now taking super PAC money, how can we trust that you're not fighting for the people profiting off climate change? Look at my record, child. Look at my record. As you fight to go into the Iraq war and no, that's not right.
There you go. Look at my record, child. Wow.
He was just mastering the selfie method.
Yep.
This kid had to go and ruin it.
You know when you try to take a selfie with some people and then they remind you about your Iraq war record?
That is the worst.
I hate that.
That is the worst.
I actually kind of can't wait till Obama becomes grouchy like that. Bail out the banks. Look at the record, child. Go windsurf with Branson.
What are you complaining about?
Yeah, what are you complaining about?
All right, let's just do Donald Trump here. Donald Trump trying to be the tough guy. Apparently, he was not in the what do they call it? The what is that room? What's it? He was not in the Situation Room. My understanding is he was that. Is that true?
It appeared, well, at least the Obama's photographer said that the metadata suggests that they staged that photo at a different time.
The metadata suggests that they staged the photo that he was in the
it was really
the
like
Situation
with a
Room.
carton of
More than likely that he
McNuggets.
that he was on the golf course. And the reports from the New York Times suggest that the timing and this killing of Baghdadi had to deal with the American pullout. We got the information from the Kurds, of course, as to where Baghdadi was, but Donald Trump, he knows I've got to project like I'm a tough guy. I just watched the Seagal movie, and I'm going to go out and talk about this now.
Last night was a great night for the United States and for the world. A brutal killer one who has caused so much hardship and death, has violently been eliminated. He will never again harm another innocent man, woman, or child. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
I ripped his lungs out. There he is, Donald Trump, reminding everybody that we killed him in a violent way, as opposed to the way that we kill other people in battle.
You should have seen the way Obama killed Bin Laden. He was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, can I offer you an aromatherapy bath that has poison in it, so your experience is nice?" And then he apologized for doing it. That's what Obama did.
I didn't do. I did it violently, like a dog. Made him bark.
Make him bleed.
Make him bleed like a dog.
Actually, I was asleep while it was happening.
So
I had
proud
food
of himself, and I think he's got to be pissed that he's not getting enough credit. In fact, here's my prediction: if it hasn't already happened today, within a couple of days, he's going to be complaining about how he got no credit.
Oh,
for it.
none. Oh, it was so great. On a tweet on one of my text threads with Waz, someone put in the Baghdadi thing, and Waz just wrote like, "LOL, nobody care about terrorism anymore, dude." He's like trying so hard to be like Obama.
Here is Donald Trump talking about how brilliant ISIS is. Now, the Kurds have done a very good job.
It was
in
a
rolling
tough
up
show.
It was a very, I want to
Yes,
make it
all
clear.
the intelligence is due to the Kurds, or most of it, for this whole thing.
Here he is talking about the killing of al-Baghdadi.
From the first day I came to office, and now we're getting close to 3 years, I would say, where's al-Baghdadi? I want al-Baghdadi. And we would kill terrorist leaders, but they were names I never heard of. They were names that weren't recognizable, and they weren't the big names. Some good ones, some important ones, but they weren't the big names. I kept saying, where's al-Baghdadi? And a couple of weeks ago, they were able to scope him out. You know, these people are very smart. They're not into the use of cell phones anymore. They're very technically brilliant. You know, they use the internet better than almost anybody in the world, perhaps other than Donald Trump. But they use the internet incredibly well. And what they've done with the internet through recruiting and everything, and that's why he died like a dog. He died like a coward. He was whimpering, screaming, and crying. And frankly, I think it's something that should be brought out so that his followers and all of these young kids that want to leave various countries, including the United States, they should see how he died. He didn't die a hero. He died a coward, crying, whimpering, screaming, and bringing 3 kids with him to die, a certain death. And he knew the tunnel had no end. I mean, it was a closed end. They call it a closed end tunnel. Not a good place to be.
Classic closed end tunnel. It's a military term. Speaking of military, General Miley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told reporters, this is according to Natasha Bertrand at The Atlantic, he doesn't know where Trump got his information that Baghdadi was whimpering and crying when he died. I don't know what the source of that was.
Yeah, well, I have different sources.
I got extra.
Many people have sources.
Sources. What you don't know, General, is they call it a closed tunnel. The classic closed tunnel.
It was a closed end. They call it a closed end tunnel. Not a good place to be.
No.
But nobody uses the internet better than
Nobody uses it better than me. They use the internet. They were geniuses. The internet.
That I don't disagree with him about. That he recognizes his own
recognized game.
Yeah.
Yeah. ISIS uses encryption software to lure kids into fighting for mass killing from the Netherlands, and I give my personal cell phone number to foreign heads of state.
Unbelievable.
Same ball game.
Don't know how much time we're going to have for too many calls, but let's take one quick. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 210.
Good afternoon, Sam. This is Rick Perry. I'm the only one of the 3 amigos who hasn't testified to Congress yet. I'm holding out, Sam. I don't intend to be a participant in what I consider to be a not only illegal but improper investigation. They need to have a vote, Sam. Can I be honest with you, Sam?
Please.
I'm having a hard time sleeping at night, you know. What's my destiny, Sam? Am I going to end up in the pokey? Damn, man, I keep thinking about all the officials that went to Club Fed over Watergate, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, G. Gordon Liddy, hell, even John Dean, who turned on Nixon, ended up serving 4 months. What the hell did I get myself into working for Trump? Remember when he made fun of my glasses? Trump said, man, he said, he put on the glasses so people will think he's smart, and it just doesn't work. People can see through the glasses. Ouch, Sam. You know how many hours I spent looking for the perfect pair of glasses to make me look smart? But I'm not a shrinking violet, Sam.
Right.
Here was my retort. In July of 2015, Trump offers a barking carnival act best described as Trumpism, a toxic mix of demagoguery, mean-spiritedness, and nonsense that will land the Republican Party to perdition if pursued. Hell, I even endorsed Cruz. Then I joined Trump's cabinet. What the hell's wrong with me, Sam? I think of better times, like in August 11th of 2011, when I announced I was running for president. I shot to the top of the polls for over 7 weeks. Those are the best 7 weeks of my life, Sam. You know what killed my chances, Sam?
No. Oops.
Debate.
Yeah,
Debates. No, oops was later. The first debate.
The first debate. Sorry, Rick.
Debates are overrated, Sam.
Yeah. I
was a badass on the stump, promoting my book, Fed Up. I know you're a big supporter of Social Security. You say it's the most successful anti-poverty program and the most beloved government program in the history of our country.
I do.
You know what I think it is?
Nope.
It's a Ponzi scheme, Sam. You say anti-poverty, I say Ponzi.
I understand. I am surprised that you still have this much passion about politics right now. I get the sense that you're really more oriented towards business at this point.
Well, I'm a little bit scared to be honest with you. You know, after that, I got a little bit of a backlash from Republicans. I didn't see that coming. Damn, did you even know that Republicans like Social Security?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
A week after the announcement of my candidacy, I had to reverse track, but the damage was done. It was tough running against a field of all the intellectual heavyweights, you know. You're just looking at the polling leaders, Bachmann, Kaine, Gingrich, and Romney. That's a hell of a cabinet, Sam. I used to contemplate who would be a better Secretary of State. Bachmann is such an erudite wonder. Her immense knowledge of foreign policy and deep insight into the complexity and culture of each country is staggering. She thinks outside of the box, Sam.
Rick, I got to be honest with you. Rick, hold on. I just got to tell you that comedically, I don't know if Rick Perry is worth much more. I think it's been totally mined. I think you've done a great job of it. It's been funny, but I mean, we can't do this for too long.
Okay, well, okay, I'm a little offended because
John,
it was
great. This is John from San Antonio.
Okay. Who's that? Is that the guy who dominated you in the impeachment debate?
Yes, it is. Let me tell you something. The Rick Perry, excellent. My point is, like, there's only so much gold in that mine, as it were.
Okay, well, I'll just get into Herman Cain because that was a tough choice. You know, Herman Cain was like, he's so great himself because when he started talking about Becky, Stan. Damn, I was impressed by that, you know.
All right, that's a good one. No, it's good. I just don't, Rick Perry, you know, he's not the zeitgeist anymore. We'll see what happens when he has to.
I beg to differ, Sam. I beg to differ. What's your advice to me, man? Should I testify? I mean, Barr's not going to do anything. I'm gonna skate as long as Barr's around. they're not going to try to impeach Barr. I mean, according to you, it's just going to, they're going to take a vote to remove Trump, and he's not going to pass. It's just going to be one cluster F after another. Nothing's going to happen.
Oh, well, I want,
is that right?
I want them to impeach Barr, but I don't know. Let's hear what the court has to say from this national security deputy. I'd be curious to see if the court says that he should go and testify, because if he is compelled to testify, seems to me that others would be too. John,
well, who's going to enforce that?
Well, that's a good point. I
Rick
appreciate
Perry
the call.
getting much more precise in his analysis post governorship and cabinet post.
Appreciate the call, John.
Glasses are finally working.
Worried about Rick Perry.
All right.
I mean, or whoever this is.
Thanks, Rick.
All right.
That?
One last call. This is the final call of the day, folks. I know got a lot of people who've been hanging on for over an hour now. I apologize. Last call of the day, calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey there, this is Kentucky Fried Comrade from California.
Kentucky Fried Comrade from California. What's on your mind?
Just wanted to tell a quick little story, and I'll try to make it as fast as possible. But I've been car shopping lately. Totaled my car a couple months ago, so I've been car shopping. And I went down to San Diego last Thursday, and went out at 3 o'clock to go look at one single car. Ended up being a 5 to 6 hour fiasco. But where I ended up after getting the runaround from this one company was I was sitting in a car dealership office around 8 o'clock, kind of bartering back and forth with the guys. And there were these two Brazilian guys, and you get they change the price, they do all those shenanigans. Eventually they call up the owner to the shop. And so I start arguing with the guy, and he basically, it's the owner of the shop. And he starts explaining to me like, oh, I only sell to Brazilian immigrants because they need to drive for Uber. And because they drive for Uber, I can put extra fees on top of the loans that we give them so we can make some extra money. I don't really sell to Americans.
Wow.
And I thought it was a completely fascinating thing and also incredibly evil. But yeah, it was something I'd never experienced before. I didn't really know that was a thing, but wanted to tell that story.
Interesting stuff. Kentucky Fried Comrade, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Have a great show.
You were the final call of the day. All right, folks. See you tomorrow. Harvey K will be in studio. Exciting.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid.